It's very funny. I don't know your experience this way without sounding too intimate, but coming out of college, there was always this time where if the relationship had legs, you'd be invited over to the girl's house and she'd cook you dinner. And it might be an invitation to spend the night. And I had a lot of girlfriends in those years whose mothers had gone back to school. They didn't know how to cook. And some of them, one girl in particular, was Southern and her mother intentionally didn't teach her to cook because she knew she'd be married at 17. And so I would say, you don't have to cook for me. Whether or not I spend the night, that's another story.
Welcome to our podcast, Folks, Food, and Soul, where we're exploring the stories, history, and culture of people of African American descent and peoples from the diaspora. Our guest today is Dr. Scott Barton. I'm going to share a brief introduction. Scott, I knew as a chef. Scott has a multi-talented background. He started out in the arts, and from there he evolved into becoming an executive chef. He was in the chef world for 25 years, and he's now on the faculty at Notre Dame University. And he has, over the years, acquired his doctorate. So he is now Dr. Scott E. Barton. And with that, I'd like to introduce Scott. Hello, Scott.
Charla, thank you so much for welcoming me to this podcast, your podcast. I'm excited.
I'm excited that you agreed to get on board and be part of our roster this year. This is our second year where we're airing podcasts, and I hope that my audience will be as excited as I am about the roster of folks that we have on board. Scott, I know that one surprising thing was that you started out as a jewelry designer. Can you tell us a little bit about your life as an artisan, a jewelry artisan?
Sure. On one level, I would say many of us follow or model our parents' behavior. And in my life, I have modeled both parents. My dad, during the middle 20th century, through World War II, was a jewelry designer. He couldn't go to war. He had TB. And so he was talented, but he probably got a leg up because there were so few men, and probably the competition to white men in the industry was lacking. So he was able to do not only get a job, but do really well and was very successful. So when my brother and I grew up, though he wasn't a jeweler anymore, he became an assistant superintendent of a school district. He had all of those tools and was dedicated to, in his own way, fine craftsmanship and fine carpentry. So at times as kids, we would make things, and that incentivized me. And I happened to go to a high school in Connecticut that had in the art department a jewelry program and metals, because the high school it tended to be lesser metals like pewter and bronze and brass than silver and gold. But it catapulted me to want to study that and got my BFA, my Bachelor of Fine Arts at Washington University in St. Louis. I minored in dance. You wouldn't have to totally 180 from there. But for many years, over a decade, I was a jeweler. When I came out of school, I was an apprentice at Cartier Jewelry. In New York City, I worked in the costume design field as a designer. I worked for one of a kind, what they called art jewelers or artisan jewelers out of Soho in New York City, making alternative creative stuff, sometimes with chainmail or titanium or wood or ivory. And one of the things that happened for me was I also, like I said, followed my mother. And my mother, she lost a girl child, so she only had boys. And she raised us in the same way you'd raise a girl, with all the baseball, football, sure, but also how to cook, clean, and sew. And
Which is important.
yeah. And in a way, she was very proto-feminist, so that we might marry and have a wife and kids, but we could also take care of ourselves or help in the house and make it a 50-50 relationship. And I liked cooking. My brother is also a good cook, but I really liked it. So I spent extra time. She had wanted to be a chef. And unfortunately, in her generation, as a woman and as a Black woman in New York City, where she grew up, it really wasn't feasible for easily to be a chef. Maybe she could have been a shorter cook, but she ended up becoming a dietitian and nutritionist as her first career. And so we were raised with Julia Child, with measured meals and dietetics, and a love of cooking from pre-kindergarten. And because I was very interested, she taught me how to do culinary economics, recipe development, various aspects besides being at the stove. And so I put myself partly through college, by working first as a waiter and restaurant manager, and then becoming a cook part-time when I moved to New York after graduating from undergrad to supplement the income I had coming out of college. And so at one point there was a tension between jewelry making and cooking because they're both handwork. And at one point I realized I couldn't do both because it was too much fine work with your fingers. And it made jewelry ultimately slip away because I realized the passion was more for food.
That is phenomenal. And I would say that your mom was ahead of her time,
Very much so.
because those skills that she shared with you and your brother were not the typical things that male children learned, but they're so important. Life skills are important for everybody.
particularly today, because I've dated. It's very funny. I don't know your experience this way without sounding too intimate, but coming out of college, there was always this time where if the relationship had legs, you'd be invited over to the girl's house and she'd cook you dinner. And it might be an invitation to spend the night. And I had a lot of girlfriends in those years whose mothers had gone back to school and they didn't know how to cook. And some of them, one girl in particular, was Southern and her mother intensely didn't teach her to cook because she knew she'd be married at 17. And so I would say, you don't have to cook for me. Whether or not I spend the night, that's another story. But I could see this anxiety because you felt like you had to cook for the man. Well, you have to do that for me.
Oh, that's funny. That's a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that, Scott. Thank you. You touched on a couple of the questions that I had on my list of things I'm going to ask you. Now, you shared how the young Scott used what he learned from mom and dad as he started his journey through this life. Now, as an undergraduate, and you were earning your degree in the arts and becoming a jewelry designer, what would you say jewelry and food have in common?
That's a good question. Each in their own way, they're precious and very distinct. Precious is easy to say when you're talking about gold and diamonds and rubies and emeralds. So that's one way jewelry is precious, but also it's fine skill. So it takes time. And so that's precious. And if nothing else in the labor of the person who's the maker. And it's precious. If I gave you a piece of jewelry, it becomes precious to you as the receiver. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are ways that jewelry is precious or metalwork. And you may, hopefully, if we have a good relationship or friendship or intimacy with sentimental orientation, he gave me this on this for my birthday or our 5th anniversary, to all these other things that could happen. Food has its own preciousness, but you have to start off by saying food is ephemeral. It goes away. May become a little bit of the middle of our paunch and add weight, some of it. So its preciousness is distinct in that, obviously, caviar, champagne, those are ingredients that for some cultures are precious. So we also have things that are high cost, high ticket, or rare. Golden raspberries, for example.
Yeah.
Or at one point, tomatoes were precious because they weren't native in some cultures. But I would say after particular foodstuffs that command a high price, goes back to the labor. A lot of skill and technique goes into making a dish and to making it well. And so the preciousness often is tied to labor. And then if it's not served in the home, if I'm not coming to your house for dinner and value the care and love you put into making the dish, if we go out to a restaurant together, then the whole sense of hospitality, service, pairing it with wine or beer, tipping a waiter adds to the cost. Having time, because that's another part of when both areas, they take time, and time means something or different things to different people. So that's where I see that they can be both cost, labor, time are the easy ways that I see them intersect.
That's a very good comparison, and certainly one that everybody can understand that. Now, you as a doctor in, is it anthropology?
I'm in Africana. Technically, my doctorate is in food studies. I teach in an Africana studies department. I use anthropology mostly as my analytical lens.
As a doctor in food studies, why is it that food is important in culture?
So I'm going to go back to the last question to begin to answer. One other way so I have a little inside joke in my office. If you were here, there's a lot of art in this office. But when I drink water out of this Coca-Cola, antique Coca-Cola glass. I drink out of that because our colleague and friend, Jessica B. Harris, when she was retiring from Queens College, gave me a photograph from her office that is a photograph from the South of a Coca-Cola machine that says that no blacks can purchase this Coca-Cola. And then it's in obviously like a storeroom or break room. There's a shelving behind the machine that has Coca-Cola. So if we were black people, we could only have warm or room temperature Coke. But if we were white, we could have cold Coke. So that's another preciousness relative to race and opens the door to this question you're asking, that food broadcasts, heralds, enshrines, and uplifts anybody's culture. So on one hand, I would say to all of your listeners, what are the foods that are used in your home to celebrate an event, a birthday, anniversary, holiday? Are there foods that continue to circulate because those are auspicious? Those speak to where your people are from. Those speak to your faith tradition. Those speak to ideas of goodwill or good luck. Southerners, white and black, have Hoppin' John, some of them, and collard greens. And if they eat it, maybe pork on New Year's Day, that are all symbolic foods. That the collard greens are supposed to be a symbol of folding money or dollars, 20s,
Yeah.
100s.
Prosperity.
Prosperity. The black-eyed peas are coins. The pork is, if you eat pork, is based on this idea that pigs gather food rooting forward, whereas chickens, which you're not supposed to eat on New Year's Day, they scratch and go backward to reveal the grubs. So you want to move forward into the new year as opposed to moving backwards. So pork, if you eat it over chicken. So right there, we see culture, we see kind of myth and legend. We could have faith traditions brought into it. If we say grace, we may have a food we say grace over. Obviously, different religions have something they call sacramental, that could be puja for the Hindus and the langar meal for the Sikhs, or various different foods. Also, in terms of food and culture and faith, what you don't eat tells us a lot about who you are. So if you're Jewish or Muslim, you're not going to eat pork if you're devout. So that is a giveaway. That might be your tradition. So the taboos can tell you how a culture defines itself, how it looks at what they define as pure or good food and polluted or dirty foods that may be archaic and antiquated, but it's what is taught to you. The other thing that I would say that for me is very important and is sometimes subtle is what anthropologists would call your rotten foods that today we would say are fermented foods. So if we're French, cheese, wine, beer could be that. If you're African-American, it might be chow chow. It could be pickled okra. It could be buttermilk, right? And I could go on, but in each case, sauerkraut for Eastern Europeans, kimchi for Koreans, soy sauce for Chinese and Japanese. These are foods that are usually from pre-refrigeration that a culture includes into their daily rituals. You think how often soy sauce is in Asian food.
Yes.
Almost you don't think about it, or pickles, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're exposed to whatever those fermented foods or preserved foods as a way to say, this is who we are. If you and I were Germanic or Polish, we'd have to have a relationship with sauerkraut. We didn't like it, but it would be on the table. That would tell us also, if you, let's say, I know you've had this experience, you're a young girl, you're taken to a new person's house, you don't know that's your Aunt Lizzie, but there's certain things on the table that look like the table in your own house. So that reads a level of familiarity. And if you're obviously a very young person, slowly you understand, oh, this is your mother's second or third cousin. That's why you don't see her that much. But you are seeing things that tell you this is safe. This is welcoming because she has fill in the blank on her table. And so that's a very fundamental way and how we deal with it. You might eat yogurt. The Greeks have a way of making yogurt that's distinct, that's not popular. Yeah. In the Middle East, they make yogurt cheese, and in India, yogurt cheese, but they'll make a dried one. It's hard in the Muslim countries and Iran. So that same ingredient may take on a very different aspect that is indicative that might be due to the climate in your area, heat or cooling. So the way that food forecasts or broadcasts culture really has a lot to do with what we value as a people, what our traditions and behaviors are, what the environment we live in, what the faith tradition, if we have one, asks us to do to maintain a respect for our divine entities, how we honor the rites of passage, birth, baptism, adolescence, first menstruation, marriage, up to death. We know, for example, in Hindu culture and parts of the Middle East, I love this tradition. Madhur Jaffrey, the famous Indian chef and food writer, I heard her lecture once saying that as each grandchild is born, their tradition is they would have a pot of honey, and the grandmother names the child A, and then sticks their index finger into a jar of honey, and on the tongue of the newborn baby writes the letters OM or Om, which is a prayer for peace in Hindu, so that the child is getting one of their first tastes is sweet, it's honey, and it's also whatever your grandmother's finger tastes like. Sometimes you go, like my mom's dad was an invalid for most of my life, so he had a smell. He wasn't like it was, I don't like him, but that's how I thought of him. And when I told that to my mom, she was upset because she knew him as a young father. She knew him as an elderly man. I know in the Middle East and some of the Muslim world, they'll give you something like that. Usually I think it's date syrup and then something bitter like vinegar or lemon juice to tell you that life is bitter and life is sweet. You're too young, you're a baby, but they want to begin to give you cultural lessons through food.
Extending that thought, how would you sum up the role of fast food in our culture today?
That's a good question. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a couple of kinds of fast food. I don't know if you were there, you'll remind me. But recently, in March, I believe, people who, like us, had been involved with the Southern Foodways Alliance went back, I think it was 10 or 15 years after Katrina, and that some of us had helped to rebuild Willie Mae's Scotch House and Leah Chase's Dookie Chip that had gotten flooded out. And I couldn't go to this reunion. But Willie Mae, in essence, she's making fast food in that her famous fried chicken is something you can, if it's prepared, can cook very quickly and take it on the go It might have been a shoebox lunch in segregation, etc. We forget that part of, say, fast casual or quick service, as opposed to the ultra processed food we might associate with a chain like Taco Bell. And so I want to first make the distinction that within our tradition as Black people and within Latin culture and Asian culture, there have always been certain dishes that could be made quickly. We can think about stir fry in Asian culture, that the meat and vegetables or protein and vegetables are cut so they'll cook quickly, so you get food on the table quickly. So and those are made from fresh, whole ingredients. Those are the kind of fast foods that I want if I'm going to have what we call fast food. But what most people think about is ultra processed, maybe hormone laden foods. Often, it's interesting, if I go out for fried chicken, for example, I can now say I want it on the bone or off the bone. Where I grew up, that wasn't an option.
That was not an option.
And so as a fast food product, chicken tenders, or in the worst case, reformed chicken that is in some way pureed cut up from different parts and reformed with some kind
into a nugget.
Nuggets, and even some of the tenders, low quality tenders, have binders that stitch them together. It's not, a tender originally was under the breast meat, and it was the choicest part. We only had 2 pieces in a whole chicken, but now we have the stuff where it's so processed, you don't even remember where it came from.
You're right.
And so I would say that in the best case, I used to do a lot of consulting with a place that was called at the time the Center for Culinary Development in San Francisco. And they have a newer title, and I'm sorry that I can't remember it to say this right now. But we used to do consulting where we would have as much as 50 chefs coming in to talk about food development with multinational companies. Could be Weight Watchers, could be LaJoy, could be General Mills, all those kind of companies who wanted to bring new products to market. And there'd be food chemists and market researchers and home economists and chefs. And we would talk about it. And they wanted the ideas that came out of us. And then they would try to translate it to mass industrial manufacture. And one time I worked with the guy who at the time was the executive chef for all of McDonald's. And it was very interesting because he was classically trained, European trained. And I was really fascinated. We ended up developing a burger that it was in a burger geared to parents of young children, get this, who go to McDonald's because the kids want the Happy Meal. They want to go to the Ronald McDonald House. What are the parents going to eat? And this was around the time or just before the salad bar came out. And so it was a kind of an adult, it's what you get in a nice burger joint. It didn't last because not enough adults got it, and ultimately they tended to get their kids' food and not eat there. They'd have a soda. But he had all these ideas of wanting to extrapolate European fine dishes, Italian and French, and work a way into the McDonald's menu. I know he's not there anymore, but I don't think he lasted a long time because that's not really their focus. Pizza. I love pizza when it's made well. That's food, fast food. I love falafel. That's fast food. But again, you hear me. I like it when it's made with real ingredients I can see, touch, and taste. That works for me. When it becomes so chemical that it doesn't feel good going in, going down, or coming out, I've got suspicions. And the kind of the under the table talk is it's cheap going in, it's expensive going out.
Butterball is a proud 25th anniversary sponsor of National Soul Food Month. For more than 70 years, Butterball has helped families gather around great food, celebrating the traditions that bring us together. Butterball is honored to support National Soul Food Month and recognize the stories, culture, and connections that are shared through every meal. Caring for the people around your table matters, and with Butterball, delicious meals can be easier to make so you can focus on what matters most. Butterball, care hard, cook easy. Conagra Brands is driven by a passion for food and is proud to support the 25th anniversary of National Soul Food Month. Conagra chefs also create quality, restaurant-inspired meals consumers can prepare conveniently right at home. Conagra also supports community efforts that provide neighbors with consistent access to nutritious food.
It breeds pre-diabetic conditions, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, obesity. How cheap was it really? Which is what the distinction for me about the ultra-processed food. If I have a falafel, there's salad, there might be some pickles or pickled chili peppers, there's tahini, the chickpeas, it's a vegetarian or vegan meal. It's got fried components. I could have whole wheat pita. If I have chicken, what do I get with it? It used to be, if we think of meat in threes, you'd have several vegetables, at least coleslaw or something like that. Now, a lot of times people flip it. They'll have ribs and chicken and pulled pork, and they may or may not have the vegetables. So how do we find...
Often they don't have the vegetables, which
how
is
do we
really
find balance?
a disservice.
Yeah. So that I think it's, where are you running to? Are you running really fast to nowhere in particular? Because that's what I would say when it's ultra processed. But a slice of pizza can be okay.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And one of the things people generally don't think of fast food as you've described it. And I think that's something that folks in general, and I hope my audience will as well, think about choosing fresh, wholesome ingredients that you can prepare in a way that's fast food.
Yeah, because
Because
I get it. I don't have kids. Many years ago, I taught how to make baby food. So I think you know this, but
Mhm.
usually if you're going to either have formula or mother's milk to a certain time, and somewhere between 3 and 6 months, you're going to start to think about solid food. And I was dealing with around the time of 9/11, high earning women or families, and I was
Mhm.
fascinated. They had all the tools, bells and whistles, etc. They were excited to get pregnant. Everybody would be who wants to have children, but they hadn't thought about feeding their children. And I was shocked. Okay, you got pregnant, you're watching your dad, but you have to feed this thing for 18 years at least. And so I taught how to make baby food and then get them onto solids where they can chew. And one of the things I said right away is I would interview each class at the beginning and say, you don't have to get down and dirty, but what do you eat for dinner? And what do your spouse, husband, or wife eat for dinner? And I said, because if you don't eat the things you feel your doctor, your pediatrician is telling you to feed your child, it's a good chance they might model the behavior of the parent who eats only one thing and do that. So you have to think about what you're eating and what it is. So if you're taking your kid to McDonald's, but you don't eat that food, you're sending a certain message. It might be a treat, that's valid at certain points, but if you want them to really be healthy, particularly Black people and all of the hereditary health issues or risks we run with often, then you have to eat whole food. You have to eat vegetables. So you can have, I'm not going to say you can't have pork or whatever, that's your choice, but have something else that's nutritious. Think about whole grains. Think about, do I have to have the spongy white bread with my barbecue? What's that really doing for me?
Yeah, when you talk to people, it's amazing when you find out what they've eaten, what they usually eat, or
Mhm.
even the things they were exposed to as youngsters. And I did a stint at one of the public schools, and I didn't have any exotic vegetables. They were just basic tomato, banana. And I was just stunned at how few of the children could identify these different fruits and vegetables. And I said, "Boy, there's really a blind spot here," because most of the children couldn't identify a sweet potato or celery. Now, I'm not one for celery uncooked. I like it as part of the trinity when I cook,
Mhm.
but I couldn't believe it, and I said, "Oh, they need more of this. They need more exposure to see what options there are in terms of filling up the plate."
I would argue, I agree with you. And I would additionally argue, I was on an advisory panel many years ago in New York City that was trying to implement culturally specific foods in neighborhoods where it was relevant. So if it was a
Mhm.
very Spanish speaking Caribbean neighborhood or Asian, so
Oh,
that what they're eating at the dinner table in some way is also on the lunch counter. And whether that's a sweet potato or tofu, whatever that is. Now, of course, you're going to have some kids in these districts that aren't of that background, and that might be an opportunity to share your culture.
yeah.
But it was very interesting because the people who were in the kind of nutrition, I wasn't a nutritionist, and the economists in that team were showing that it would actually be cheaper because a lot of that stuff is, if you think of Caribbean food and African food, there's a lot of roots and tubers that are not expensive.
Mhm.
Yes, you might splurge on having mango something every once in a while, but in relationship economically, you weren't at the same price point that you would with the kind of generic, quote unquote, American diet that often is not well made and is, I think you're the same as me. I grew up with lunch ladies, not prepackaged food they just reheated, women who cooked,
Yeah.
on my public
Mhm.
schools.
Yes, absolutely. Now, one of the questions, since we're talking about food and culture, and can you share with our audience the connection between Black Eyed Peas and their importance in the Brazilian culture, as well as the link or importance in the African American culture?
Oh, sure. Years and years ago, a big fan, friend, and mentee of Jessica Harris. And I really
Mhm.
wanted to mimic part of her trajectory that she did over a career. And I kind of started too late, I'll be honest, but to explore the African diaspora for its foodways in place in Senegal and Trinidad, et cetera. I've done some, but not to the degree that she has. But I had an opportunity in 2007. I had a residency in Brazil that really catapulted me to go back to school and get my PhD. And one of the things a couple of things that came up, I had known already, especially having been on the board of Southern Foodways, about what we call the culinary retentions, foods that came with the Africans or the enslavers realized they could use and feed or put on the slave ship. So things like shifting millet for corn, because it's easy to grow and they could have a couple of crops and they could dry it and make cornmeal or have fresh corn, etc. And so we have some core foods, black-eyed peas or field peas are one of them, okra, watermelon, true yams are foods that come with the Africans to the Americas. So they're culturally, they speak to where we have come from. And in many cultures, whether we're talking about Charleston or Bahia, they resonate as something that holds up our heritage. Now, having said that, when I first got to Brazil the first time, I had a popcorn bath. Now, popcorn is one of our core products, come from African interacting with Native Americans in North, South, and Central America. And the popcorn bath was spiritual. And literally people who were following Yoruba religious tradition would, at that point, maybe it cost money, but it was free. They'd be dressed in wax print cloth, and they would have a big basket, like you have your big clothes basket. And they would ask me if I want a popcorn bath, and then they would rub it in my face, my hair, my chest, my back, my legs, and had another basket to catch, because technically they felt it had part of my energy, my aura, and it shouldn't be mistreated. So they had something that would be ultimately waste, because they were, in their consciousness, cleaning the negative energy from me. And their concept was that popcorn, from the kernel to a pop, expands 60 to 70 times. So it's transformative. So it's taking negative energy. Okay. So that was, for me, when I said, wow, food has multiple meanings. Food can have spiritual meaning. So now when I look to black eyed peas as one of these foods that is, unlike popcorn, a true food of Africa coming to the Americas, is used in many religious ceremonies as the referent to certain deities. Oshun, the goddess of sweet water. Ogun, the god of iron and technology. We see it, as I said earlier, in the hopping john or peas and rice. Anywhere you go in the diaspora, I could give you a million different names. We all have something that we call peas and rice. It might be hopping john. It might be moros y cristianos, or Muslims and Christians. Baião de dois in Brazil. All of us do it. Now, part of it is a complete protein, because the rice and peas, just like we have corn, beans, and squash in Native American tradition here, but also it can summon the deities. And it's cooked in different ways. The perception of the god Ogun is very important, because in those traditions, he opens the path so we can evoke change and have future possibilities. He is quick. So it's always a little bit undercooked to remind us we're celebrating that deity. Or if it's for Oshun and she loves sweetness, it's cooked with hard-boiled eggs, because she represents fecundity, fertility. And if we were trying to have a baby, we would give prayers to her, because she's ensure that the pregnancy will take. So hers are nicely fully cooked, in both cases with dende palm oil. So within the culture of the diaspora, it is both a nourishing and nutritious food as a pulse or bean. So it's another protein. It is a spiritual food, and it is a lucky food.
That's those three characteristics of black eyed peas are certainly something folks don't think about. Would you repeat them one more time for our audience?
So it is a nutritious food. It's a nourishing food, because peas and pea beans have protein, and whether we eat meat or not, it's another source of protein. It's a spiritual food, very much. It's steeped in all of the African descendant religions. You'll find black eyed peas, and it's a food that brings you luck, or a lucky food, as we have New Year's Day and hopping john.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Scott. Thank you for sharing that. What a great example. And one of the things that I hope the audience will take from our conversation here today is that food is more than, just something to nourish our bodies. There's many hats and can serve many purposes within the culture. Now,
Yes.
we're going to wrap up shortly. I have two questions. One
Okay.
is a bonus question. You didn't see this one. My first question is, what are three dishes that you cook relatively often?
One thing that, okay, really quickly, I worked at a high-end spa in Rockefeller Center that had a healthy Asian menu. And because we were in a landmark building, we couldn't have live fire, and I had to learn how to work on commercial microwaves. I'd never really used a microwave before then. And so sometimes at work, I make my lunch every day. And again, whole food, but it has to be quick in between classes. So one of the things I do frequently is I'll make gambas al ajillo, the Spanish dish, where I'll bring shrimp in the shell to work. I will have in a container that I can microwave, sliced garlic, a little chili flakes, good olive oil, a little bit of lemon juice, maybe some chopped tomatoes. And I will I will rinse and devein the shrimp in the men's bathroom, and I'll microwave it for 2.5 minutes. I might have rice or potato that I serve with it, and it's a really lovely, nutritious lunch. That's something I eat regularly. As somebody who studies in Brazil, I should say my dad grew up, both my parents have a relationship to water. My mother's family's from Barbados. My dad's from coastal New England. He loves fish. He didn't really, but I grew up liking fish. So there's a really classical dish in northeastern Brazil, both in Belo Horizonte and in Bahia, called boqueca. They fight over whose is better. But it's a very quick, okay, this is fast food. It's a quick stew in the same spirit as bouillabaisse. You take whatever your protein is, and I'll tell you that in a minute, and you have sweet peppers and onions, scallions, and you chop them up and you saute them a little bit. You add your protein along with coconut milk, lime juice, cilantro, and you bring it to a boil. to cook the protein. And right when it boils, you pour equal amounts of palm oil and olive oil, take it off the stove, serve it. You can have it on the table, it's generally fish-based. You can have it in less than a half hour, you can have it on the table, and you serve it with rice usually. So now the trick is there's an adage. If you have the money, you make moqueca with shrimp. If you don't have the money for shrimp, make it with fish. If you don't have the money to buy fish or shrimp, make it with an egg, because you could crack an egg and making a poached egg in it. If you don't have the money to buy eggs, you could use beef lung, which is more in the interior. If you don't have that, you could use jackfruit. So any way you go, you could have a moqueca every day or have it differently or have it vegetarian. So
You've certainly made me hungry here today. And I'm sure my audience is feeling like, oh, we have to try making some of this healthier, fresh, fast food.
Yep. I have one more I'm going to say really quickly. I like the idea that out of our culture in the diaspora, we have what are called composed rice dishes. The most famous are tibujan and jollof rice that are the parents of paella. And they're usually made with rice and protein and vegetables. So we have in the United States is jambalaya. Risotto kind of mimics it. So I like those kind of dishes too, where whatever I have in the fridge, I'll maybe have bomba rice or arborio rice, and I'll have a trinity or something like that. Some vegetables, could be mushrooms, and if I have chicken, if I have fish, slowly add those things and have a one-pot meal. I like that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, because that says to folks who are listening that you don't always have to spend a lot of money, and you can make something delicious and wholesome from items in your kitchen or your pantry. But you do have to have some wholesome foods. Everything can't be in the can.
Yeah. And I would say that one of the things about a dish like that, and moqueca too, if I have a little bit of fish or shrimp in that moqueca in the adage I gave you, the whole dish is going to have the flavor. If I have a little bit of protein, whether that's bacon or chicken or shrimp or oysters in one of these rice dishes, that flavor will be, you might not get a big hunk of chicken, but you'll have the flavor. If money's an issue.
Wow. Now, my last question is my bonus question, Scott.
Okay.
I asked my guests, if you were, as a doctor of food studies, what food would you choose to be if you could choose? I'm not going to be Scott, I'm going to be this food.
That's interesting. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, so I'm going to say two things. If I'm a vegetable, I want to be a perennial so I can come back. I don't want to be a one-season vegetable. I want to be, I'm trying to think of what that, asparagus comes back every year, or a wild mushroom. I would be a wild mushroom if I was a vegetable, because if you treat them right, they come back every year so I can continue to have experiences. My first thought had been, oh, you know, it's that, or I want to be a guinea fowl. I've been reading a lot about guinea fowls for a book I'm working on. And one of the things about guinea fowl, which is another African food, it's African chicken, they like to rest and sleep in trees. Unlike chickens, they can really fly. And in most West African cultures, Southwest to up in Nigeria, Ghana, etc., they're seen as like peacocks, as sentries. They have a strong voice. So to me, that's prideful in my mind.
Yeah.
And the strong voice allows them to be guardians because they sit in trees. They tend to flock together like other birds. They are eaten and they're given for religion. They're very auspicious because the Yoruba say they started the earth, that a god was given the job to come and start the earth. He brought a guinea fowl, and wherever it scratched, wherever it flew, that made a valley or a mountain. And they are the ones that formed the earth. So they're given a lot of reverence. And like most African descendant religions, you and I live in one plane. We can walk the earth. If you know, I know how to swim, we can swim in the water. We can't live in the water. If we know how to hang glide or parasail, we can mimic climb. We can't fly. But a tree lives in the earth, but lives below the earth and grows into the sky. The guinea fowl walk the earth, fly above the earth, and live in a tree. So that they are, in these cases, in that tradition, the thinking is they have a higher level of consciousness. They're closer to being divine because they can live in different environments and exist, and unlike us. So if I'm an animal, I want to be a guinea fowl. I'm a vegetable, I want to be a wild mushroom.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I may have to turn these food folks into a book one day. What did people say when you asked?
That's a good one. I like that.
Thank you, Scott. I want to thank you so much for your time today and for helping us become more informed about food and culture. And I hope we can invite you back again. Thank you so much.
This has been really fun. I wish you the best in the podcast. And I hope that it gets.
All righty. We hope so. Thanks a lot. And I'll see you soon.
Okay. Take care. Knock wood.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today for Folks, Food, and Soul. We hope you enjoyed our podcast, and we'll see you the next time.